I'm going to talk about this a little bit. I'm not going to do a long one here. This is a presentation I made for a talk that I gave on campus several years ago. It was actually, I think, still one of my most favorite topics, economic growth. And this was kind of I was trying to think of a title. Talk about child labor, right? It was just something that I listened to at that time. And think about it. So why children worked and why children don't work, right? So why don't if you have any kids, why don't your kids work? Geez, when you hit 10, it's time to start earning your keep, right? Well, the whole child labor of the 1700s, and now children don't work, child labor is evil. Today, perhaps, yes, but at the time, no, right? And so there's all sorts of myths and lies about what child labor was. Was it, Tom Woods, he's joked that the idea is that children used to just dance in the meadows, and then, their parents say, capitalism's here, Tom, off to the mines with you. No, that's ridiculous. Another ridiculous idea that Tom Woods has said is it just seems that all the world's worst parents live in poor countries. Isn't that amazing? Well, no, it's not that they're terrible parents. It's that in a poor country, in fact, maybe talk to somebody from a poor country that grew up in Vietnam or something like that. I had a student and I was asking her, and she said, yeah, she worked. When she was 4 or 5, she worked very hard. And it's not because her parents were terrible people. It's not because the country was run by capitalists, evil capitalists. It's because the country was poor. And if you don't work at 5 years old, you don't eat. Your family doesn't eat. It's a lack of productivity. There you go. I ruined the whole thing by telling you the basic. It's a lack of productivity. Child labor comes from a lack of productivity. And the reason is there was a time, believe it or not, that it took 5 people to produce enough stuff to feed a family of 5. So again, if your youngest kid didn't work, and I have some really good examples here. In fact, first of all, some of the common myths. Child labor is a result of capitalism. No, child labor before the 1800s was known as, what do you think it was known as? It's called labor. Back then it was called labor. They didn't call it child labor. It was just, that's the world. All children worked because they just couldn't produce anything. It wasn't until capitalism that you actually had the ability of children to not work, because the production through capital, that is the discovery of oil, machinery, steam machines, eventually steam-driven machines would produce things, and they would do work for you. So instead of having 3 people doing enough work to produce something for them to eat, you could have 1 man and a machine, and the other 2 people would be off, and it would, what we say, free them up to do more productive stuff. So you have 3 men, 3 machines doing the work of like 20 men, right? So government laws, typically child labor was reduced or ended, and then the government came in and made laws. So they were really post hoc, right? Not Proctor hoc, I think is the term, right? After the fact, not because of. So accumulation of capital and machinery kills jobs and hurts workers. That's not really true either. And the weekend brought to you by unions, not true either. So again, if it takes you 8 hours in a week to produce enough stuff to consume to keep yourself alive for a week, then that's what it does. But if you add machines and you add capital and things like that, and eventually you can work 40 hours a week and produce more than you used to at 80. And so, hey, you get the weekend off, right? So this is you might have heard of Malthusian. That was, he in the 1800s wrote quite a bit about how population growth was going to outstrip food supply and things like that. We're all going to starve, and so what we need mass murder, basically. He talked about pestilence and wars and things that helped cull the population. And if we don't do that or have some kind of control of the population, then people are going to starve and we're going to have these massive wars and things. And he just didn't understand the capability of being more productive. It's given period amount of land, and boy, we can't really do much with it. And size of the people, well, eventually we've got 100 acres here and it feeds 50 people and we have 50 people. We have 25, eventually once we hit 51 people, we're gonna start to have to go hungry. Well, the reality is that 100 acres can feed 50, and then with the discovery of oil, and we have pesticides and we have fertilizer, and that 100 acres, instead of feeding 50, can now feed 500 or 5,000 or something, right? So, child labor before the modern era, again, was just called labor. It was due to low productivity. You couldn't feed a family without it, and I have a great example in the next slide, I think. Skip ahead. Well, actually I do, before I get to that, it's important to understand savings. So, especially in poor countries today, you really need the wealthy. So this is where wealthy come in. They take their excess money and they invest it, or they save it, right? If nobody saved money, you wouldn't have any savings. There would be nothing. So imagine like you're stuck on a desert island and you're all by yourself and you fish with your bare hands and you catch one fish a day and that feeds you. If you work a little harder one day, you think, you know what, I wonder if I could make some capital that would make me more productive in my fish catching. And so I work all day long, I work a lot harder and a lot longer, and I catch 2 fish. And I eat one of them today and I save the other one for tomorrow. And maybe I go lean, and maybe I eat half a fish a day, and that half a fish sustains me for the next 2 days, while instead of fishing, I'm out there building a piece of capital. Well, wouldn't it be nice if someone else had excess fish? Well, here I'm there, and I eventually build my net, and now my net catches 3 fish a day. I consume 1.5, so I'm much better off. But I still have 1.5 fish a day that I'm not consuming. What am I going to do with that? Well, if there were other people on the island, I can lend it to them, and with the promise they would return it, give me at the end of the day instead of I give them 1.5 while they go and build their own capital equipment, right? So you kind of get the idea there that you need people with money to go and invest in capital that will eventually make you more productive. And NPR's T-shirt project has the great example of this, so I'll get to in a few slides. Patent systems, I think this is kind of my take. Necessity is the mother of invention, they said, right? Innovation is the key to transforming ideas into invoices, so ideas into money, that is. The vast majority of patents have been applied in the last 100 years, financial incentives via the market. It brings potential profits, and we've got a lot of inventions like the light bulb allows people to think and read after sundown, so it leads to more inventions and innovations. Here's a myth: capital kills labor, but in reality, capital and labor go together very well. So you can imagine a Costco without a forklift, right? You have like 50 men trying to lift these boxes up to the high shelves. Well, it just wouldn't exist. There'd be no Costco's. There'd be no tanker ships. This is what happened before the invention of the cargo box. You would take 2 to 3 months to load a ship. You'd have 100 down on the waterfront. Right? It's a famous movie about the mafia, the unions would be out there and they control it and they decide who gets to use the labor and all that. Yeah, it put a lot of people out of work, but they went and got more productive, better jobs. So this is what I'm talking about. So in Bangladesh, back several years ago, they had a collapse of a factory, and it led to a lot of people boycotting Bangladesh t-shirts, which is like 86% of their GDP is t-shirts. And so they went from, thanks to the t-shirt factories, these capitalists that went into Bangladesh, built these factories, well, they didn't build the factories. A lot of times they brought the equipment to Bangladesh to make them, they put it in, sometimes they would put it in old apartment buildings, so not built to house these heavy equipment. And so it did collapse. But what happened is, as they went in and they started producing these t-shirts at super low cost, here in the US, we think factory work is terrible. And yes, it is terrible in the US, but according to them, it's not. It's vastly better than their other options, being those down there. So what happened is their appalling under 5 mortality rate of 4.6% was far worse. 20 years ago, it was almost 3 times that, right? So as bad as people think of Bangladesh, since they've had this capital development, their mortality has gone down by a third. Their wages have gone way up. Their health, education, women's employment, all these things are vastly better. The EU threat of boycotting Bangladesh, which means less good jobs, terrible working conditions. But if they boycott it because they want some minimum wage, hey, minimum wage of $20 an hour in Bangladesh, so nobody will produce there. It's just ridiculous, I claim. It's demand, right? So Bangladesh can never afford it. But if they can't afford it, okay, well, some people are better off, but most likely because these people are sitting in some high-rise in Bangladesh. It's a great example. We're talking about like wolves and things, and usually there are people in the 36th floor of downtown Seattle telling people and farmers in Montana what they should do, that they should allow wolves and bears and stuff to roam their fields, right? Does that make any sense? I'm gonna look at you and I'm gonna tell you, you know what, for lunch today you should have lean turkey, and I'm gonna decide what you need. You don't even know who you are, right? Your online classes. I might not know who you are, I might not know your needs, maybe you're a vegetarian, but I know better than you, so even though I've never met you. So that's kind of the problem here, is they've never gone to Bangladesh. They don't know what's really going on down there. And they think, oh, these kids should be in school, not working. Yes, we all agree, that would be great, but that's not a possibility. They have two other options, starve, or often what happens tragically is they get into the sex slavery. They're kind of forced into it. You can either starve or, so factory work is actually great. And here, NPR's Planet Money. Bangladesh factories, drastic, gigantic improvements. So from near starvation, so they had a story of two sisters, and the older one got a job in a factory, and the younger one went to the factory and lied about her age, and said she was older than she was, and she got a job too. And the older one, what happened is, because of the way it is there, her father kind of handed her off in marriage to this guy. They thought I had money, turns out he didn't, and they had a child together, and she's miserable, she hates him, but they have a kid together, and not really much they can do. Women don't have a lot of rights in these very poor countries. But when the factory came in, the younger daughter went to the city, got a job, and started making her own money. When you make your own money, that makes you independent. So I think they're Hindu, and the younger daughter was dating a Muslim man. Now that is a no, capital N, capital O, times 2, right? Absolutely not. Father was, this will not happen. But the daughter said, well, you know what? You can't control me now. Because traditionally, it's the father has to take care of the woman until he can marry her off to somebody. But now, because she makes her own money, she's independent. And she decides, she makes her own decisions, and he can't control her anymore. And that is what these factory jobs did in these countries, is they freed people. They gave them alternatives. They gave them self-sufficiency and independence. And what they do is they take that money and they buy education for their children. So these countries are so poor, they don't have free college and things like that, right? They don't have free kindergarten. So a lot of the schooling through 6th grade might cost $5 a year or something, but that's a lot of money to them. And now they have these jobs, they can do it. They eat more meat. So in the West, you're a vegetarian by choice. In poor countries, you're a vegetarian because you can't afford meat. So this is a lot of, you can kind of read through this. This is an example of what's happened. How much has capitalism made goods cheaper? That's one of the things it does, is it just makes the more productivity, lowers the prices. You can look at these various things. Percent of the poor in '84 that owned these versus in 2005. This is in the Homer Economicus book, right? Clothes dryer, the percent of the poor doubled in 20 years. Refrigerator increased a little bit, but most people had it. But color TV, and you think of what a color TV in 1984 was versus 2005. So think about it today. Flat screens. This used to take up half the living room. When I was a little kid, my aunt had a big screen TV, but it was about this wide and terrible picture, but it was big, right? It was one of those giant boxes. And I thought, wow, that's so cool, right? Our TV sits on top of it's a flat screen. It's probably bigger than theirs, and the picture is probably 10 times better. And I bet it cost 1/10. In real money, it probably cost 10% of what their TV costs. My parents had one of the crummy first computers, and the printer I think was $1,000. Their video recording was $1,000, and it's VHS, right? So imagine the phone I have that I'm recording right now has a better picture, has more memory storage, everything just better. And it's so much cheaper. This phone, I can do a number of things with it. It's got better picture, more memory, yet it's significantly cheaper. In terms of real money, it's probably a third of the cost of what that was. So, how many hours the average person has to work to buy one of these products is gone in half, 1/4. Good grief, a seventh, right? A third, a third, a fifth. I mean, it's just the relative prices have dropped dramatically. So I suggest watch the Leslie Chang video. That's a fantastic TED Talk on what it's really like to be a factory worker in these poor countries. She goes to China. Just a lot of good stuff in there to understand how economic growth happens, right? And it's important to understand that people, the wealthy, they're not Scrooge McDuck. They don't swim in their money, right? They invest it in other countries, in other people, in entrepreneurs. Shark Tank. Shark Tank is the perfect example. You have billionaires that go on TV and invest their money in the little guy. And so, actually, this is good for film. What do rich do with their money? They're not parasites. They invest in other businesses and they make other people wealthy. Right? So the wealthy invest in capital. Capital makes people more productive. More productivity makes people employees, raises wages, right? And raises wages raises living standards of individuals. And that's kind of the basic way that it works. So watch some of those videos, and if you have questions, let me know. Hope that you enjoyed this, and I kind of cut the last one off a little bit, but take care.